Where do we go from here? Is the whole world going to end? Is this really the best that we can do? What is the alternative? What would it look like? What is the plan? What is the next stage in the evolution of human civilization? These are not hypothetical questions, and the whole point of this show is to answer them. We're your hosts, Matt Holton, Amanda Smith, and yours truly, Zachary Marlowe. I consider this episode a benchmark, a primer on the root problems in the world today and the alternative vision we have to transition beyond it. We've been doing this show for quite a while now, and we've covered a huge range of topics all across the spectrum of exploitation, collapse, and the shimmering prospects that lay on the other side of that. But every episode, we keep coming back to this word, the system. It's the system. The system is the problem, and the only true solution is in redesigning it altogether. So let's clarify. What do we mean when we say the system?
It's a good question, and in reality, there's no just one system. It's lots and lots of different systems that work together in various ways. And I mean, when you're talking about systems theory or systems thinking, it essentially encompasses everything we do all the time. You know, everything is systems. You know, all the ecosystems of the planet, the economy, our methods of production, our socioeconomic system. There's all these different systems, and no one of them is independent of any of the other. And I think that's kind of the mindset that a lot of us are kind of stuck in, is that somehow these things operate independently from each other. However, from a system standpoint, the science is all about trying to take a step back and viewing the relationships between all these different systems and how they work, how they interact with each other, how our economic system interacts with our ecological system and our biosphere and the planet and our resources. And the systems that we're really talking about primarily that affect us the most and really affect most of everything that goes on in the planet is our socio-economic system, which is capitalism. It's our mode of production and the way our market economy goes about manufacturing goods. And I think that's one of the main problems with the socio-economic system that we have right now, is it's based on growth and consumption. It essentially requires every individual in it has to pay rent and work to survive, just to exist. Essentially, it's incentivized the commoditization of practically everything that it requires for a human being to live. You know, there's nothing as really for free anymore, except for about the air we breathe and the sunshine that comes down from the sky. And other than that, we probably pay for most of the other things that we see and do and ingest and enjoy on a daily basis. And, you know, over the long term, our socioeconomic system has really incentivized us doing that. You know, the profit mechanism provides that incentive to do that. You know, every good economist will say, well, you know, we have to have such and such amount of growth and a healthy economy and this and that and the other. And so growth is really baked into our socioeconomic system through the mechanisms of banking and interest and, you know, other systems, in fact, you know, that are really the monetary system and all the different things that it kind of revolves around. Essentially, eventually we do hit those limits to growth. And that is essentially what's happening now in the form of climate change and exceedingly, you know, more disastrous and catastrophic natural disasters. And I think now when this is being recorded here in July of 2021, we've had some, you know, incredible heat waves this year of, you know, even more forest fires every single year round. A lot of people are starting to wake up to the fact that we can't just continuously emit carbon into the atmosphere based on this economic mode of growth and consumption, you know, for decades to come and everything be okay. You know, when a town in, where is it, British Columbia just set, you know, you know, just completely smashed their previous heat record by like 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, and then the entire town burned to the ground. Was it Lytton, I think, is it? Lytton, British Columbia. And now the town is essentially wiped off the map, you know, with one heat wave. How many more times is that going to happen in the years to come before people finally start to recognize that, hey, you know, maybe things need to change. Maybe this economic mode of growth and consumption isn't really going to cut it. You know, even if we can transition over to, you know, clean energy, what is it, in the next 10 years or something? I personally don't think it's fast enough. I think we need to do more. I try not to give up hope, you know, but here I am. We do our best, right?
I could just really echo everything Matt was saying, and though he didn't say it in these terms, basically, when I hear the word systems, every thought that comes to mind is derogatory. I'm bombarded by derogatory terms like systemic, indoctrination, exploitation, extraction, all those big buzzwords. But I'm also reminded that systems, just like most anything else that man has come up with, has dual purposes. It can be used for good. There are system designs out there that would take us from this world of scarcity and doom and gloom into a world of abundance and sustainability and longevity. How do we get there, of course, is the question, and how to evolve out of this one into the next one.
So the thing that's really keeping us living in this reality of scarcity instead of realizing our abundance is a belief system. And the overarching ideology of our world isn't religion or nationalism or patriarchy. That's all secondary and fed by the belief in scarcity and the need for hierarchy and competition within the reality of money to dictate material circumstances. We collectively believe this monetary system has value, so it does. And something unreal becomes very, very real as millions die because they can't access resources that are totally abundant, because they don't have money or the means to get it. The monetary system is governed by market economics, which is the religion of our social system. And the god of this system is the market that dictates what is valuable based on what is profitable. If it isn't profitable, we don't deem it valuable, and it doesn't happen, period. Economists and politicians talk about the market like it's this all-powerful, mysterious force they depend on, the invisible hand of commerce that controls our whole world to mediate all life under these nonsensical notions of supply and demand, even though it's constantly manipulated by Wall Street and speculation and trade and the cancerous, dark magic of financialization, making money out of more money. The governments of the world are ultimately subservient to the market and the needs of the very small number of transnational corporations that have extracted and amassed 99% of the wealth and thus power in this world. And the money that is the lifeblood of this system, which determines if you die of hunger or typhus on a sidewalk or get to go to space on a rocket with your name on it, is based on absolutely nothing. It's literally just numbers in a computer. It's not based on gold or life or need or our planet's capacities. It's based on debt. I won't go too deep into this because it's the ultimate rabbit hole. But in short, it's a fabrication that creates a parallel universe where something that doesn't exist has more value and importance than the very, very real life needs and processes of our planet, our shared ecosystem that is currently being destroyed at an accelerating and degenerative rate. We are literally killing our own planet and enslaving our own species for points in a fucking game with no bearing on reality. Our whole society is built around money, and but before you say it's not the money, it's just people who have it. It's just greed or selfishness or like humans are inherently greedy and they're naturally going to be this way. That's the ultimate rationalization for this irrational addictive belief system. If you really study it, every single one of the worst behaviors we have, greed, competition, war, slavery, pollution, poisoning water supplies, and just total ecocide is done because it's rewarded and culturally reinforced. And all of our problems like poverty, sickness, unemployment, homelessness, climate change are perpetuated, not because we don't have the resources to fix these problems, but because they simply aren't profitable. Because the whole reason money exists in the first place is because things used to be scarce. And now, because of advancements in science and technology, we live in incredible abundance, yet maintain that scarcity and inefficiency because we can't perpetually make a buck off something someone already has, something that is the common share of everyone on Earth. It all comes back down to this. We have the resources to give every human being on Earth a higher standard of living than ever before, but we allow 20 million people a year to die of poverty-related deprivation. We allow this machine of endless production and extraction that is destroying our environment to continue because we're trapped in the belief, the glitch in our value system that we need it or we'll fall apart.
I think that's kind of one of the biggest, points of, post-capitalist society is just to kind of wind down the activity to a large degree to essentially what's only necessary, to keep people housed with food and energy and clothing and all that sort of stuff. But no, I don't want to say like luxuries or things like that, but I'm just saying like, eliminate the unnecessary activity and positions, back and forth commutes with, millions of people in all these cities every day to financial positions at insurance companies. And a lot of these things are just kind of, ideas and numbers and paperwork being traded around that essentially could be eliminated with more efficient, decision-making systems that we have now. Money is kind of the tool.
Which is why a resource-based economy would make sense, because everything would be managed equitably and practically and rationally, which would eliminate, as dear David would say, all the bullshit jobs, and subsequently would eliminate so many arms of the capitalist machine that thrive off of these bullshit jobs and the things that we have to do and the hoops we have to jump through to maintain that.
The only reason you need to work to live isn't to meet our needs. The whole labor for income paradigm isn't to meet our needs, but just to keep you spending money, buying shit to feed the consumer cycle that needs constant growth or it collapses, which it does anyway, every 5 years now. And in the financial collapse of 2008 or the Great Depression, the crops didn't stop growing out of the ground. The earth didn't stop producing. We just didn't have enough money, all for a belief, an addiction, a distorted value system, which is fucking insane if you think about it.
But how do you get a nation that's been indoctrinated to believe that the more they have material-wise, the more freedom they have, to reverse that belief? That's the basis of the whole problem.
I think the only real way to do it is to provide people with an alternative of some sort to where they can actually see it in action and there's a proof of concept that these things would actually work. And local to where they can actually visit and maybe even stay somewhere like that and experience it, learn about how it operates, take part in it, possibly attend some demonstrations or some seminars and things like that. But how would a society like that operate? Let's get into the meat of it. How would, a resource-based economy essentially operate? What makes it so much better? That's one of the questions that I get asked most out of everything, essentially, is how would a post-capitalist society work? What are the details of some of it?
Basically, it all comes down to freedom. We need to change the parameters of what we think freedom is truly. Are we free if we can't leave our job because we lose our health care? Are we free if we can't make choices and participate in our system if we don't have money and we have to do very unfree things like enslave other people and topple other countries to attain that freedom? Are we free if our world itself is dying? If we don't have a world to live on, we're not free at all. So I think the main reason why a resource-based economy is really like the only sensible way of even thinking about this is that we have to tether our economies. We have to really truly economize the resources of this planet. We have to actually intelligently manage them and use all the technology that we can and all of our collective and collaborative potential to manage those resources. Our economic system is directly tied to the resources of a local community that are intelligently managed by network feedback, machine learning, by algorithms, by the actual cutting edge technology that we have, to cybernetically manage resources. Without some arbitrary political process, you get this amount of resources because we say you do in this kind of Soviet sort of model, or in the market model where it's just the crazy willy-nilliness of the invisible hand of the market and these manipulated, stock-driven market dynamics that decide what gets produced. What gets produced is based on the resources of a region and the need of the people, which is intelligently managed not by a corruptible human, but by a system that we collectively program to manage our environment.
I'd like to touch on a few of the details in particular. There's an article that Peter Joseph just wrote not too long ago. The Social Architect, a new framework for effective activism and social leadership. He's got a nice little diagram or image that he's made there. And it's got a semicircle with 5 different sections within that semicircle. I think Peter Joseph's done a really good job in summing it up. All these areas combined together essentially are able to, create an economic mode of production that doesn't need money anymore. Those 5 different areas are automation, access, open source, localization, and digital feedback. I'd just like to talk about each one of them for a second and just kind of detail a little bit about, what those things would look like. So for automation, we have transition from labor for income emphasis to machine automation emphasis. So the goal is to maximize productive capacity, reduce human exposure, and increase efficiency, right? And so that means essentially that we're using technology to automate as much as we can, right? We're not afraid of using robots, of technology, of computer programs, of algorithms to grow food, to wash our dishes, to mow our lawn, to manufacture our goods, to drive our cars, and other things like that. And that eliminates a huge portion of the labor that's involved or needed in a society like this, right? So we're automating a large portion of, the activity and just, human labor that might be necessary at this point, but in the future, we're trying to eliminate that labor through the means of automation.
One of the biggest problems with our world today is unemployment, and people can't survive in this world because there's not enough jobs being created. And like with all the fossil fuel jobs that are going away, with all the jobs that are going to go away from trucking, and they should, because people die on the road more than any other cause of death. So there's a crisis of unemployment that a monetary system cannot solve. And automation in this current system is just going to lay off billions of people. Billions of people are going to have no job and no way to make money. So a system where everybody's, all the work that is not needed to be done, all the work that we need to do to get by is essentially automated, freeing people up to do the work that humans can only do, creative work, make music, inventive scientific discoveries, innovation, creativity, homekeeping, community building, and then just living.
So access-based, access essentially means a lot of the things like that we would quote unquote own today, we wouldn't necessarily own, we would access them, right? Like we could access a vehicle, we could access a shopping cart, it's there when we need it, but we don't necessarily need it all the time. And so those resources can be shared a good portion of the time. And by using access to things, essentially we're able to distribute, resources like that between a greater amount of people, and they go further, essentially. Instead of a vehicle sitting in somebody's driveway for 22 hours a day and them only driving it for 2 hours a day, that same vehicle could service 10 different people or 10 different families possibly, depending on what times they need to be in certain places. And it can act as an autonomous taxi, essentially, right? Or right now you have Uber drivers, but a few years from now, they'll probably all be autonomous as well. And so that's what we'll likely have, is things like that. Autonomous vehicles where you have access to them when you need them. And that way, 1/5 of the amount of cars is, enough to service as many people as we would have right now. Or
before anybody hears that and thinks you're coming from my private property, I mean, really, open access is a way for everybody to have not less, but more. I mean, unless you're, a super billionaire that has a yacht for your yacht, I mean, you're going to be getting a lot more out of a system like that, where whatever you need or even really want, I mean, because it's not just need. It's not like, we have to have this fascistic way of scaling back all necessity. Everybody's basic needs and even luxury needs can be totally met and exceeded. And it's like, say you want to go out on the weekend and drive your boat, but you don't have a boat. Today in this environment, you got to work your ass off for 30 years to get a boat. If you want a boat, you just go to a lake and there's boats that you can use, and because there's less of them being used, they're easier to maintain, and with a centralized sort of production, even the repairs that are needed, I think everything would be made in a way that is modular, that is open source, that is, anybody can change it and adapt it to suit their actual needs. I mean, imagine you don't have to work. You don't have to work. You don't die if you don't work. Anybody who does want to contribute to society, you can, and you have the tools. If it's an open access economy, you have open access to all the education you need, instruments, cameras, whatever you need to express yourself and contribute to the human race in a real way, not just working at Arby's to stimulate the economy. Don't you want to live in that world? Come on. And we're not going to die?
The point you're making, when you unpack it all and look at the logistics of that thought process, you realize that people are accepting the reality of having to be exploited and break their back and work ridiculously hard for their entire lives to own a few things versus having access to whatever they could need. It just doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical as the day is long. We've been so indoctrinated with that buzz term, engineered scarcity, that we can't even conceptualize what it'd be like to have access to anything and everything we want to use or enjoy. And that's really the root of that problem when it comes to transitioning from a possessive socioeconomic system to an access economy.
Yeah, that's a good point too. We wouldn't necessarily have all these various ways that companies purposefully limit people getting goods, and a lot of it's not necessary too, especially like digital goods. I mean, we could have access to all kinds of free information and software and things like that out there, but simply because that information is, able to be duplicated an unlimited number of times digitally, and it doesn't require, very much energy in order to do that. So, I mean, things like that, like paywalls essentially as well. There's a lot of different things that, would go away in an open access economy like that.
One real quick point to that and to the technology industry. I was talking to my dad the other night, and he has been kind of a tech pioneer all his life. He worked for a company called Lotus Development, and they had a development lab. And he told me that, things didn't leave the lab, like they didn't release things from the lab. Things had to escape because they had all this technology and all these things that they created. Like they created instant messaging way like a decade before the public had access to it, but they couldn't figure out how to make it profitable. So it didn't leave the lab. So they couldn't make a profit off this thing. They couldn't figure how can we get people to pay us to pay for this service if we just give people this service that allows them to communicate with each other instantaneously. Yeah, I don't know. It's a net good for human life,
How can
but it's not profitable.
anybody hear a story like that and still believe that competition and the competitive market is a friend to innovation? It's just not. It's actually the exact opposite. It absolutely inhibits, if not completely thwarts, the process of innovation and collaboration. Competition, bad. Collaboration, good.
Well, I think we have a natural bent towards competition. We want to be great. We want to do well. It's like we don't need to make our whole society about incentivizing
Yeah, but the artificial hierarchy narrative has caused us to exasperate our ideology about what a hierarchy is and what doing good and accomplishment actually is, to the point that it's been integrated into every aspect of our life, especially when it comes to the money that we earn and the jobs that we secure and the status quo that we maintain.
It's a profound point. And I mean, I think every single one of these points as like, maybe on the surface, they're technically aloof, or the brain doesn't immediately hear, open access, or, the imagination isn't immediately freed up, or we don't grasp the immensity of these changes that we can make to our society that would change us on a profound and fundamental level, all for the better. Because so much of the insecurity in the world comes around ownership, comes around possession. People are possessive. We can become possessive of people because we live in this industrial environment. Everything is mass produced. Our ideas are becoming mass produced. Music is mass produced. And all of our attitudes toward each other are transactional and possessive. I can't overstress what a disgusting thing even the word it feels in my mouth, because the truly true, like love itself is an acceptance that we exist together, or an appreciation of somebody on a profound level. And it's become an ownership thing. And that is a corruption of life and value on the deepest level.
Capitalism has commodified every aspect of life to the point that our interactions with everyone in every relationship capacity boils down to possessiveness. If not consciously, subconsciously. If you're ordering food from a drive-through window, you expect that person to deliver what you ask for and nothing more. You don't care who they are, if how they might need support. It doesn't matter. If your order isn't right, you're likely going to be upset, and you're not even going to think about the fact that it's because you think you possess that entitlement, that privilege, that right to just expect something and get it. And then in relationships, the four-letter word love, that's another arm of possessiveness. Love is a Disney dream. It's not what we've been taught it is. It's another arm of possessiveness. I could go on, and I won't because we don't have time today. But I really want to hear the other points that Matt wants to expound on. But I just wanted to point that out, that we all really need to analyze the place that we're coming from when we say we love someone, or whenever we're having any kind of interpersonal reaction with someone, because possessiveness has creeped into every transaction that we make.
I guess we've kind of been talking about open source really because we've been talking about possession and open access to everything now. That kind of sums up what open source is the opposite of all that, essentially giving away things for free, whether it be, copyrights or information or everything like that. There's no more possession of information or copyrights or things like that. Everything is shared openly as far as, like proprietary, quote unquote, business information, but there wouldn't be business, so to speak.
These are like world-changing shifts condensed to a very simple sort of web of changes that need to happen. I mean, open source, it's like COVID is a perfect example of this. I mean, the vaccine patents aren't being shared with the world because that's a proprietary for-profit piece of property, you know, an idea, a world-changing idea. I mean, and the crazy thing is like insulin is proprietary, you know, and the creators of insulin sold the patent for $1 because they wanted it to be a universal human good. And now insulin costs hundreds of dollars. It costs people, you know, an Xbox a week, like $200 a week or something, or they die. And it's like you know, to get back to COVID, you know, because we can't distribute these vaccines to the world and make them, you know, the common good of all, and they're proprietary and jealous and guarded, you know, these other variants are developing all over the world that, you know, we're going to continue having to deal with this problem perhaps indefinitely, just because we can't share something that is costs pennies to manufacture and imminently affects the good of everyone.
Next one is localization. So that would essentially mean that we try to produce as much locally as possible. We're minimizing the transport of items, right? We don't ship things over to Vietnam to be packaged and then all the way back to the United States and things like that. You know, the more localized we can make our production, our resources, and everything of that nature, the better, essentially.
Globalization is such a monumentally fucked up process that's all driven by so-called free trade agreements that let companies outsource labor to countries where they can pay slave wages because it's somehow cheaper and more, quote, efficient to mass produce everything and ship it all over the world than grow and produce it locally based on our actual needs. 20% of the population consumes 80% of the world's resources. I mean, and which percent do you think that is? It's obviously the West. And our whole way of life is carved out of the third world. 40% of it straight up goes to waste too. Trade and consumerism is forced on every country in the world, often with military force or brutal debt bondage and structural adjustment policies that devalue local currencies and jack up interest rates or put essential industries in the control of private corporations. It's the penultimate form of colonialism and imperialism that it has subjugated the whole world, not just to the iron fist of militaries and at the point of a gun, but by this economic system. It's destructive on every level, and it's turning everywhere into the same monoculture strip mall, even here at home. Even in our own Western countries, you know, it's destroying not just habitats and soil and biodiversity, but human culture and our sense of connection to where we live.
Being disconnected from where we actually live, and speaking about how food is shipped around, you know, from this place to that place and then back to the place it's going to be sold. And I can already hear the naysayers going, well, if you didn't ship it to Argentina, then how would those people make money to make a living? And what they don't stop and think about is the fact that if there wasn't a paywall between them and the food that's local to them, they wouldn't have to package food from 1,000 miles away in order to make the money to buy the food that's local to them. And that's why we just need to cut out the middleman and just give people what they need to live, you know, and access to what they need to be a contribution to society instead of whatever word you want to use, slacky, lazy. People want to say that without jobs that people would get lazy, but we know that's not true. If people simply had access to education and tools, people would be a contribution to society instead of there being millions of people on welfare draining, quote unquote, draining the government and our tax money because there aren't enough jobs and there aren't enough resources out there because they're being hoarded by the wealthy and the corporate class. That was a bit of a rabbit hole.
It brings up another point on the open source aspect of it, is that, you know, the open source communities have created so much value, you know, for the world. I mean, just look at something like Minecraft that people spend hundreds of hours in every day of their life, or Wikipedia. You know, people write every Wikipedia entry and they spend it, they don't get paid to do it. And there's so many advancements that we have made collectively and together that people don't get paid a dime for. I mean, it's just a bullet hole in the whole.
Actually, that is an excellent example. Actually, the video game. I guarantee you that some of the people, probably a very large percentage of the people that spend hundreds of hours building these communities virtually. You're damn skippy. They would do it in reality if they had the ability, the access, the permission, basically, but they don't. So they escape into that virtual world and try to make it their own. And when that's not necessary, there's so many people out there capable of making the world the place that we all envisioned it to be to begin with, and they're just suppressed, and they're oppressed by the monetary system.
I think the biggest point of localization is we need to shift away from this centralizing of everything, this mass production of thought, of organization, of every single thing in our world, where individual communities don't have any agency. You know, we're trying to map models of being and jobs and forms of resource extraction to areas that it's not native to, and that's completely destabilizing to the ecosystem, the real systems of the planet, that we are destroying this world. And we are, subjugating countless nations and peoples to this essentialized, hegemony, this radically reductive idea of capitalism, of this one way of living, that this is the only way to live, this is the only system that can work. And the big point of localization is that it's returning power to the people. It's returning power to all of these communities. So we need to do this. This isn't it would be better if things were. It would be better, but it's a necessity. It's a necessity that these individual communities actually work on their own.
So digital feedback is the next topic, and regarding, how all this would come together. Essentially, digital feedback would use a lot of sensors through computers, and just other methods of gaining data as far as consumption of resources, exactly what is being used where, what is needed in certain places. This could be for food items like agricultural items, or other household items, or industrial items like chemicals, raw materials, resources, things like that. There's a lot of different places where feedback systems could be intertwined through various, like production systems even also. Instead of the price mechanism dictating, a lot of resources go, simply we input, through computer algorithms and feedback devices where those resources are needed most based on certain criteria. And then we have these systems essentially figure these things out for us. There's always a certain human element to it, especially in the beginning, but I believe over time, more and more of these processes would be automated based on feedback from sensors and also user feedback as well, just democratically engaging the public through say applications and, voting systems, and gaining feedback about what the public think about certain directions and policies, decisions. As far as digital feedback, there's a lot of different ways that could be interpreted in a lot of different applications, but that is another central tenet as far as how a moneyless society would operate.
Well, basically, it's adding the Internet of Things, which is the progressive smartifying of all objects in our world. Not just our phones, and it's basically everything in our world has the capacity to be smart, to be connected to a grid, to be constantly in communication with itself. So our entire imagine a smart house. We can kind of conceive of that, but imagine a smart city. Every aspect of it is connecting and communicating with itself. The resource management aspect of this, it's basically the way, grocery stores today are in a lot of ways use sensors and things like that to automate the process of stock taking and understanding what is running out, what we have. So a lot of these processes, we essentially have the infrastructure of it already built. And as far as automating away the corruptive and insanely inefficient, bafflingly stupid political processes that we have that are in no way a form of direct democracy, that is this crazy form of mediation, we can automate almost all of that away and create a truly sort of connected social media infrastructure, a political autocorrect, if you will. There was actually, I was reading the other day about this project CyberSyn in Chile, which was in the 70s. They essentially had this American cyberneticist fly over and design them a resource management and production distribution software. Basically, a precursor to a resource-based economy, which is a computer system that automates away all of the basically market functions of price regulation and saying we need this much production of this product, we need this much distribution of this product. Basically, in the 70s, they did it. They made it to where it worked, and it was picked up by Western propagandists, news media, and things like that. And they cried, "Oh, big brother," and they shut it down. The Nixon administration said we absolutely can't allow this to happen because like what's going on in Cuba right now with sanctions and economic warfare, we just can't allow a third world nation to thrive. That we can't allow abundance to take root in any of these systems or nations, as they are all parts of a system of resource extraction and over management and control by systems today. So basically, digital feedback, it seems difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, but it's really just bringing all of our mediated systems into the 21st century, truly meeting our actual capacities and technical abilities to just automate away so much of these processes that take up so much of our lives, that are so corruptible, that one bad person can completely mess up, and taking away the ability for one individual to become despotic or powerful, or to hold a position of power like Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Biden or Mitch McConnell, any of these people that have had political office for decades. They use that position of power to leverage their influence and control the system and manipulate it. Where a process where we automate away those things and basically make it so that it's a one-to-one direct democracy completely invalidates that, completely outmodes that. And it also outmodes a lot of Marxist conceptions of workers' councils to mediate production and, state versus no state. It just effectively obsoletes all of these questions. We can automate away all of these antiquated, rust-covered power structures and social organizational forms of the past and make it so that we all have collective autonomy.
Digital feedback is how Peter Joseph has worded it in his book, The New Human Rights Movement. And so inside the circle, right, we just went around the outside of the circle there, right, with those 5 things: automation, access, open source, localization, and digital feedback. So all those 5 things are essentially aiming to achieve scarcity reduction, increased sustainability, and inequality reduction. So all these things are kind of working together in harmony to create a reduction of scarcity, right? So we're trying to create an abundance of goods to where what you need and what you want, you have access to it. You don't necessarily have to have a yacht or a jet ski or a mansion or everything like that to be happy and to have everything that you need, right? You have access to what you need. You have access to the education, to the food, to the housing, to clothing, to entertainment, to community and culture, and to lots of other different things in your life, right? With all these systems together, we're aiming to achieve these things as well. So the second one is increased sustainability, right? We want all these things to essentially to not contribute to global warming, for one, right? We want to start sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere, and as well as we want to use our resources wisely, right? We want these things to not damage the environment. We want them to start doing the opposite, to regenerate the environment instead. We want to cut down on our resource usage as well as the fossil fuel usage and make that sustainable, right? So we're using all these things to achieve increased sustainability. And last but not least, inequality reduction. So in a sense, there's nobody at the very top or at the bottom, right? There's no Jeff Bezos, and there's no, labor that just got hired on yesterday that, just takes orders from everyone else. Essentially, everybody's a part. Everybody has ownership in these types of systems. And, it's for us to figure out exactly how all that will work, right? It's equitable, meaning fair. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is equal all the time in every way 100% of the time, because that's obviously not the case, and it's not realistic a lot of the time. It's what's fair, and it's what's equitable, and it's what works for everyone, essentially. And those are the systems that we're trying to achieve and implement.
Another point toward the open access point of that, which to so many people is like, oh, you're taking away my private property. That's like their worst nightmare. But Elon Musk's actual plan for Tesla is to corner the market on self-driving vehicles and basically shift more toward an access-based ownership service where they have all the cars and you just use them. So this is actually amazing to me that capitalism, the free market, has innovated away the actual Orwellian dystopia that people have been decrying or saying that socialism was going to bring for generations. So it's like an open access economy doesn't touch personal property, which is your toothbrush, your car, any of these things at all. It affects private property, which is a water source or land or something that is, privatized for the use of production. That is the good of all. Where the crazy future that we're going to, where iniquity is so great and acquisition is so total by these very few people, that they own infrastructure altogether. They own communications infrastructure like Zuckerberg. They own the transportation infrastructure like Elon Musk wants to do, so that you don't own a car, you just rent it. Like, I mean, we're doing that already with Uber and Lyft and all of this stuff. So many people don't own their cars, they just pay them down. But this system, this capitalist system, is innovating a system where you don't have personal property, there's only private property, and you don't own it at all. So that's what's happening already. And these people are terrified. Elon Musk is talking all the time. He's got this real paranoid thing about AI coming alive and destroying everything. And there's this Terminator view of AI that's going to do this. What AI, it's a machine that learns. And it does what we tell it to do. Like our algorithms for social media, we tell them to generate profit. So we want people to remain on pages. We want them to, click more. So we want to, basically the algorithm intentionally shows you things that piss you off to keep you clicking more. So it's like, if we did create an artificial intelligence, a truly intelligent AI, something that's capable of monitoring all of us, that has access to all our information, all the data that we're producing, and it's going to do what we're telling it to do, which is generate profit at the expense of all life. It's like our child, and it learns from us. An abused child learns how to be abusive. They can't help it. So if we create an algorithm or an artificial intelligence, and I'm sure we're well underway of doing that, with the ethos, with the consciousness of profit motivating it, it will absolutely destroy all life on Earth. It will, it will reduce life into death for profit.
It's like the paperclip generator. Have you heard of the paperclip generator? It basically it's an algorithm, for a machine to just make paper clips, right? So it can make paper clips out of, pretty much whatever you get it, right? But its ultimate purpose is to make paper clips. And so, it runs out of certain materials to make paper clips, but it finds other materials to make paper clips. And eventually, it turns the entire world into paper clips.
That sounds like a Rick and Morty plot, honestly.
And that's the end of the story, right? Right. It's essentially like profit, it just eat up the entire world, except it's profit instead of paper clips. So.
Well, paper clips are actually more substantial than profit because it's just numbers in a machine.
At least they're useful. I was just going to say, you came really close to making a point. Maybe you did, and I just disassociated for a moment or something. But making the point that even in the monetary system where supposedly we have personal property, you still don't own anything. You still don't own it. So why are you clinging to things, to material things so strongly? Because even if you pay off your car, you're still paying for the insurance, and even if you don't make an insurance payment, you've got land taxes, and even if you don't have land taxes, you might have a mortgage, and if you don't have a mortgage, you have to pay for the food you eat, and so on and so on. Nobody really owns anything as long as we're still paying someone to access the things that we want and we need. So why do we continue to do that? It just blows my mind. But I guess I just have a really simple mindset. Like, it just gets so redundant.
Well, it's the most propagandized, it's the deepest myth in our culture, the predominance of money. I mean, you tell people, oh, I want to move beyond money. And even if they call themselves like some radical, they're like, oh, that's utopian. You say you want autonomous, basically freedom. You want basically direct democracy in a system where there's not a ruler and a subject. And even radicals will say, oh, that's utopian. Well, no, we need a little tyranny for a little while, and then we'll gradually taper it off, and then we'll be free. And it's like, what are you talking about? People are so completely religiously inured into this delusion that the way that we do things is somehow inherent or intuitive or necessary, that to question that, you're the ultimate heretic of our time.
And on that note, I really want to address the audience with a question. I'd just love to see this feedback in the comments. Have you ever been in the situation where you're realizing that you like what you're doing, the job's going well, you appreciate your coworkers and their inputs and stuff, and then it comes down to a point where if your coworkers are getting ahead of you in some capacity, you are going to lose out. And I don't know about you all, but recently I've become more and more aware of how that survivalist voice in the back of my head starts getting louder and louder. Like, no, you can't let that coworker do better than you. You can't let them get one up on you, because then you won't be able to survive as easily or even at all, perhaps. Like, basically that competitive mindset, like, I've just become painfully aware of it, and it's really hard to do away with. And we need a system that's based on collaboration, or we're just going to compete ourselves into oblivion. We're just going to compete ourselves out of existence. That's what's going on right now. We're competing ourselves out of existence in the name of consumption and status quo. and survival, which doesn't have to be based on the things that it's been based on for the past century or so.
Scarcity. It all comes down to scarcity. And so much of our culture is a relic of scarcity, this attitude of, oh, I can't let so-and-so get this because then I won't be able to get it. But that's not true. We can have an abundance. We can come from an abundant place and all have access to everything that we really need or even want.
People get like this general misperception of the hierarchy, the artificial hierarchy. They get it mixed up with the actual hierarchy, you know, where people do have certain skill sets, other people don't. But it doesn't mean that we're naturally competitive. It just means that according to our environment, some people are conditioned to do things and some people are conditioned to do other things. And so my mind just always goes back to that whole argument where we're supposed to be competitive and this is natural. So capitalism must be the best system because it's premised on competition, but it's just not so. It's just not so.
Well, everybody does have something that they are uniquely disposed to do. All of us do. We have a proclivity, you know? I mean, there's a lot of things that I do, and I think a lot of us can do a lot of things. We should move away from this I only do one thing attitude, where we could all be, you know, Renaissance people, you know, with many skills and hobbies and, you know, the ability to play music and the ability to paint and draw and to tinker in scientific applications and to, you know, do what we're doing and kind of build the world and kind of plan society in this ways. Or some people want to build things. Everybody has something that they want to do. And in a society that makes knowledge proprietary and makes knowledge itself something that you have to pay to acquire, and a system that really, truly, I would realize this at the post office the other day. I was fuming and I just realized how wrong this is, that a human being is sitting behind a desk, a servant to a computer that could be completely easily automated, that a human being with hopes, dreams, fears, a life story, parents, children, whatever, goes in there every day and sits behind a cash register and does a pointless fucking job all day, every day. That could easily be automated away.
To be a servant to the system.
And if they don't, they die. For what reason? For just this crazed delusion of economics, of anti-economics that doesn't economize our resources. It blows them. It intentionally devours more and more and more all the time. So it's just truly crazy. It's crazy that a human life has been, I was going to say that people need to be at a certain level of uneducation to basically submit to servitude like that, to not see that this is an insane system, that hell no, I'm not going to go and do that, that people can't be educated to a certain degree. So we need our society to literally be stupid for this system where there's that's based on there being a master and a slave class to continue working. Otherwise, the whole thing flips over. So imagine a world where education is free, where anybody can just learn how to do whatever they want. Everybody would figure out the thing that they want to do or could do well, or the multiple things they could do or do well. That alone, I think that right there alone would radically transform things in under a generation. If people could just, I can learn whatever I want for free, and I don't have to spend the majority of my life, generating arbitrary amounts of profit for my employer. I'm free, and I don't have to work or die. I can actually figure out what it is in my life that I want to contribute to society. And we have a society, not a bunch of people trying to eat each other. Sign me up.
I want to be one of those people that 10 or 20 years from now, I'm still on this path of helping the transition come to life, and hopefully it won't even take that long, but to be realistic. But at the same time, I look at people who've been on this path for decades, and I don't know how they're still doing it, because I'm already like, why are we still talking about this? Why haven't we changed paths yet? I just can't.
As complicated as those 5 points may seem, really it's a radically beautiful world. I mean, it's a world where you don't have to think about food. You don't have to think about healthcare. All of this stuff becomes automated away. I mean, imagine the potential that we could reach if we just didn't have to think about this shit. If we didn't have to, sit in traffic and grit our teeth on our way to a job that we hate, that we only do just so that we can meet these most basic needs. A job that predominantly literally doesn't matter, isn't helping the world or contributing to society, and is in fact doing the opposite and is driving us closer to the cliff. I mean, just imagine a world where there's true equality, where we don't walk around and have this sense that everyone around us is a fucking idiot, or that we can't trust people, or that everybody's coming for us or trying to take what we have. And that's why people are afraid of new things and systems that challenge that do seek to create abundance, because in a lot of ways people identify with this condition. They're adapted, to just make do and get by and say, oh, okay, it's worse for me to accept that there's a better world out there than to just say, okay, this is life. Life is suffering, and there's nothing we can do about it. So I'm just going to adapt to it, like a person in prison who loses hope that there's a world outside those walls and gets angry when they see a bird fly in, because we would rather bear the ills we have than fly to others we know not. But we really don't have a choice. This antiquated system has reached its limit and fails to meet our most basic needs and keep up with the real demands of our ecosystem, the real life ground upon which all else depends. If you think this is naive or idealistic or out of touch with reality, I'm sorry, but there's nothing more naive than thinking that this system of endless growth on a finite planet is going to solve the problems that it created. That's naive. Before the hooks of a dying worldview start clawing at you to conjure up all these anxious reasons why that can't be, or it would fail, or how we tried that, and it failed, blah, blah, blah. I want you to put your energy instead toward imagining how it could work, what such a world would look like, how it would work, what your place in it could be, and how we can come together to overturn the false limits of the collective psychological hang-up of monetary scarcity. That's it. That's what we're fighting. And transcend into a world of abundance beyond anything before possible. Help us spread this vision and make it more real every day. Subscribe, share your thoughts and ideas in the comments, and help us keep dreaming this impossible dream at patreon.com/moneyless society. The only thing that gives this monetary system power over our lives and world is belief in its value. That's it. And the threat of extreme violence, the coercion of deprivation for noncompliance, and a massive propaganda apparatus doing everything in its power to keep you from imagining other worlds. But the first step, really, is actually aligning ourselves with the reality, the hard truth that a better world is possible.